I'm going to talk today about the status of prey fish in Lake Huron, and Daryl and I are actually going to split this talk. So I'll start the first section here discussing our acoustic survey during 2017, and then turn it over to Daryl for the second half. Just by way of a brief introduction, certainly prey fish are important in the Great Lakes for a lot of reasons. First off, they are food for economically valuable piscivores. Also, we consider prey fish part of a balanced and a healthy Great Lakes ecosystem. And in particular, when the biomass or the availability of prey fish is in balance with the needs of predatory fishes, we consider the lakes to be healthier. They also, certainly in the case of native cragganines, represent opportunities for commercial fisheries. Obviously, a lot of history with cragganines in the Great Lakes system. So the U.S. Geological Survey prey fish assessments, generally the purpose today is to describe the relative trends in relative abundance and species composition of prey fish in Lake Huron. We do this through two primary tools: bottom trawl assessments and integrated acoustic and midwater trawl surveys. These two tools do target different fish guilds. So the demersal species and pelagic or semi-pelagic are targeted by the bottom trawl survey, and the acoustic survey targets the pelagic and or semi-pelagic species. So these surveys sample different areas and time periods as well as different time series. The acoustics is considered our synoptic whole lake survey, shorter time period, around 14 years. And the trawl survey, the bottom trawl survey, is now exceeds 40 years, and this is sort of our long-term trawl assessment. The results from these surveys, we like to think of them as complementary, so they sort of together present a more comprehensive picture of the status of prey fish throughout Lake Huron. So I'll start again with the integrated acoustic survey. By a brief synopsis here, we continue to partner with the Fish and Wildlife Service to conduct this sampling in Lake Huron each year. So the Spencer Baird and the Sturgeon are the two vessels. Steve Leonard and Chris Olds from the Fish and Wildlife Service assist us in completing this survey. We completed the survey in under a month this year, which is actually a pretty nice time frame. We had pretty good weather, so this was completed during September. And as we have done in the past, we collect multi-frequency acoustic data on these between these two vessels. I should point out that the fish density estimates and all the biomass estimates that come from that are based on the 120 kilohertz, which is sort of the standard for fisheries acoustics in the Great Lakes. Survey effort during 2017, we allocate acoustic effort between these five geographic strata in Lake Huron, sort of color-coded here. We had a really similar level of effort to 2016, 26 transects, around 480 kilometers of acoustic effort. In conjunction with this, we had 56 midwater trawl tows. So I also want to point out, we also continue to take advantage of these platforms while we're sampling in offshore areas and collect additional lower food web data as well: mysis, zooplankton, and chlorophyll A. So I'm going to jump right into results, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly so I can turn it over to Daryl here. First, focusing on rainbow smelt, and all of the graphs I'm going to show today are set up pretty similarly here. So we have fish per hectare of age 0 fish on the left, and kilos per hectare of the yearling and older fish on the right. In 2017, we saw an increased density of age 0 production of smelt, roughly 600 fish per hectare. This is up from around 150 fish per hectare in 2016. We saw an increased biomass of yearling and older smelt as well. It's been fairly stable for the last number of years here, a lot of variability, but no real trend, and a slight increase in 2017. Arun has showed a map similar to this from a previous year, but if we look at the distribution of rainbow smelt, now this is shown here by a 3-kilometer sampling unit. We can see much of the smelt biomass is located in the North Channel in northern Georgian Bay, some areas here in the northern Main Basin, as well as in the southern portion of the Main Basin. So we generally see pretty low productivity in terms of smelt in the central Main Basin. Moving now to bloater, we also saw an increase in age 0 bloater abundance in 2017. This was actually the second highest for the time series. Generally, a lot of variability in age 0 production of bloater. Certainly increased greatly from the 1997, which is sort of our reference year for this survey. We saw a slight decrease in yearling and older bloater, although there's really a lot of variation around these estimates. So these estimates have fairly low precision. There hasn't been any real significant change overall in biomass for the last few years. Now, a similar map here shown for bloater. We continue to see very high numbers of bloater in a couple areas, in particular in southern Main Basin, and also somewhat in the northern Main Basin as well. So again, not a lot of fish production here, especially in the U.S. side of the central portion of the Main Basin. Alewife populations in Lake Huron remain depressed. We've caught alewife pretty much every year of this survey. These numbers are very low. As far as age 0 fish, we estimate density of 2017 at less than 1 fish per hectare. This is roughly 2% of the long-term mean. Certainly, we haven't seen any of this turn into any amount of recruitment of older fish. You can see biomass here remaining quite low. And again, this is our reference year here, 1997, just for comparison. We've continued to try to do a better job of estimating Cisco abundance in Lake Huron from midwater trawl surveys. We'd like to present here today Cisco estimates from the last few years, about the last 7 years, from acoustic survey catches. So this is going to be, again, fish per hectare of all Cisco on the left, and biomass density, kilos per hectare on the right. We saw an increased density in biomass during 2017. Density was estimated at about 4.8 fish per hectare, or around 2 kilos per hectare. Now I should note that these confidence intervals on these estimates are obviously quite large. So these are scaled up to lake-wide estimates of Cisco abundance. And for a lot of the reason is that these estimates are based on catches that largely occur in northern Lake Huron. So if we look at just the epilimnetic waters of the North Channel and Georgian Bay, our biomass estimate is roughly 7.5 kilos per hectare. And so we can see over the last 7 years where the majority of Cisco have been caught on these acoustic surveys. This really nicely sort of delineates this area where we're catching them. The highest densities occurring in North Channel, Georgian Bay, and some areas here in the northern Main Basin as well. Quickly looking at cross basin trends in biomass density. Georgian Bay, we saw a very moderate increase, although since 1997 this has been declined substantially. In the Main Basin, also a moderate increase in 2017 relative to 1997, a slight decrease, not as significant as Georgian Bay. And in the North Channel, we've seen a lot of production over time, really not a lot of trend at all. It seems to be cooking along. And a twofold increase in 2017, driven solely by rainbow smelt biomass. Looking at lake-wide biomass, again, a slight increase driven by rainbow smelt. Most of those species here are drowned out by the most abundant, which is bloater and rainbow smelt. But if we look at total density, we start to see some of the other species that make up the catch in our acoustic midwater trawl surveys. Emerald shiner, alewife, sticklebacks. Again, density here driven largely by rainbow smelt in most years. So I'm going to kick it over to Daryl here from the bottom.
Thanks, Tim. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to shift gears over to the bottom trawl, results from the bottom trawl survey. As Tim mentioned, a major difference with this survey is that it surveys the main basin of Lake Huron only. We use a 72-foot head rope wing trawl. This year's survey was conducted the last 2 weeks of October. We survey inshore, offshore transects at each one of these 6 ports, 5 on the Michigan side and 1 on the Canadian side. Then we survey depths at anywhere from 9 to 110 meters. I think I'm just going to skip through these methods in the interest of time here. There is a report out on the back table for both the bottom trawl survey and the acoustic survey, which contains a lot more details. So looking at just estimates of lake-wide prey fish biomass from the bottom trawl, the 2017 estimate was about 20.9 kilotons. This is the 3rd lowest biomass we've observed in the time series since it began. Compositionally, 95% of that biomass is composed of 3 species: bloater, rainbow smelt, and alewife. About 65% of that biomass is bloater, with rainbow smelt and alewife comprising each around 14 to 15%. If we look at the distribution of biomass throughout the basin, you can see that we have fairly, I don't know if this is showing up here or not, but fairly high production in the northern and southern ends of the basin, but the central parts of the main basin here are producing very little fish, and this has been consistent between 2016 and 2017. Looking at individual species, you can see that alewife population sizes remained at historically low levels over the past decade or so. There was a small blip of young of the year in recruitment last year, but we really didn't pick anything up like that this year. Alewife, the sizes that we're catching, everything's still pretty much in that young of year size range. A few of those young of year from last year, it looks like we're beginning to pick those up, but you can see that the size distribution of the animals is still really truncated towards the younger age classes. The only places in Lake Huron that seem to be generating any alewife biomass are these northern ports, Detour, Michigan, and Hammond Bay, both for the young of the year and yearling and older sized individuals. Bloater has been relatively stable population size-wise over the past several years. We did get peak in abundance in the 2011-2012 time frame, but most of the other years they've been tracking along roughly a line here at about 5 to 8 kilograms per hectare. They continue to seem to produce recruit fairly well. You can see that 3 of the largest year classes that we've measured in the entire time series have actually occurred in the past 5 years. So they don't seem to be limited at getting to that, getting to the young of the year stage in their first fall. Again, as we saw with alewife, we see most of the production occurring, or most of the biomass being localized in the upper and lower, or northern and southern parts of the lake, with very little, with very low catches of bloater off of Alpena and Au Sable Point. Rainbow smelt, we're at an all-time low abundance in 2017. They've only produced any sort of measurable year class about once or twice in the past decade. So things look bleak, at least from a bottom trawl perspective, for rainbow smelt in the main basin. And once again, you can see these northern ports tend to have higher concentrations of fish than in other parts of the lake. Deepwater sculpin, just like some of the other species, remains at relatively low levels. One little increase in abundance there in 2011 or 2011. Otherwise, things have remained very low relative to the 80s and 90s and first part of the 2000s. And round goby also, at least in the main basin, in offshore areas of the main basin, seem to be well below their invasion peaks that occurred in the first part of the half of the 2000s and again in 2011 and 2012. So in conclusion, it seems that abundance and species composition of prey fish in lakes seems to be relatively stable over the past decade. Both surveys are picking up on a kind of a large area of the main basin of the lake that seems to have low fish abundance. The current lake state seems suitable for some native species. For example, bloater can seem to continue to produce reasonable sized year classes. However, other species such as deepwater sculpin remain at very low levels and don't seem to be showing any signs of recovering. And then finally, I'll touch on this in another talk in a few minutes, but we continue to work on efforts to assess round goby given some of the nuances of their life history and behavior that make them very different from some of the other prey fish that we study. So with that, I'll acknowledge the crew of the research vessels that gave us a big hand with doing this work and some other help from some students this year, and Tim and I will take any questions.